It's time for the Las Vegas Sports Line, brought to you by the Sunset Station with sports director Chuck Esposito. Presented by WagerTalk.com.
And here we go with the Monday edition of the Las Vegas Sports Line. Back for another week. Chuck Esposito is, he's so depressed about the Gusev trade that he refused to do the show today. No, that's not true. Chuck is on vacation. He will be back next week. Vacation time coming to an end for all of us in the gambling industry because we're getting to that time of year. The NFL preseason starts on Thursday. College football is not that far away. We've got a heated run down the stretch coming in Major League Baseball. Yeah, it's a pretty busy time that's coming up. So Chuck will be with us next Monday, but don't forget all kinds of great stuff going on at Sunset Station Casinos and their app. It's actually a terrific app, STN. Great bonuses when you play as well. We'll tell you more about that later on. Reunited, and it feels so good. That's
Are you
right.
Peaches or Herb?
Well, I'm sure not Peaches. I might be more like grapefruit, something along those lines. I'm Dave Cokin, and that is the voice of Scott Spritzer. We've done a lot of stuff together over the years, and Scott's going to be with us on Mondays throughout the football season. I'm excited, man.
I'm looking forward to it, man. I've been doing a lot of radio for the past, year and a half since I left the Las Vegas Sports Line, but it's all been, just pieces a bit here and a bit there. So when you said, hey, you want to come down on Mondays, I was all for it. Good to be back in the studio, and I can't wait, man. I mean, we're just a couple of days away from Hall of Fame game. I mean, I've been enjoying myself being on vacation this summer, but it's time to get busy, no doubt about it.
And one of the places we'll be busy is in college football. Scott and I are both. I think this is fair. For me, I know it's my best percentage sport. I think baseball might still be my favorite sport to sit and watch every night. But from a handicapping standpoint, my ROI has always been best in college football. So obviously I'm pretty excited about the start of the season. And I know for you as well, you'll be doing a lot of weekend stuff as well on ESPN National, as you've been doing for several years with my Uncle Mel. He's not my uncle, but Mel Kiper and myself go way, way back. And you do great stuff on that show. And obviously it's heavily geared to college football.
I enjoy that on Saturday mornings. Usually it goes Chris Felica and then me, or the other way around on Mel's show. And we had a pretty good run last year. I started out, I'm going to say I was 1-5 or 1-6 through the first 2 weekends, had some splaining to do, so to speak, and then we just busted out, which is the way it was for me just about everywhere last year. Slow start first 2 weeks, then had a really nice run after that, both college and the NFL. The Sunday show we're still discussing right now. The Saturday show should be back, and we're on bright and early if you're out here on the West Coast. It's generally around 5:30 in the morning Pacific time. So
you've got to get the information out before the game starts.
There you go.
I had a similar college football start last year. I don't know if I won a game the first. Well, I'm sure I won a game, but I know I lost week 1. But did not lose much after that, fortunately, and hopefully we'll do it again. And the reason I mention that is we're going to get into the Mountain West Conference in today's show. But before we do that, let's take, an assessment of what took place with the Golden Knights this morning. Always important news here in Las Vegas. And it hasn't been a great offseason for the Golden Knights. And now it got a little bit worse as Nikita Gusev, will not be with the Golden Knights. It was anticipated after they were forced basically to move Miller and Howler that was done to clear enough salary space to sign Gusev, but they couldn't come to an agreement. Gusev is off to the Devils. The Knights at least get a consolation prize, a second and third round draft choice, but I think this one stings a bit.
I think because of what you mentioned, having to get rid of a couple of players that maybe they wouldn't have if they didn't think they had a chance to sign Gusev. But, I'm more bothered by the fact that they're not going to have grunts like Belmar on the ice this year or Carpenter. The Colin Miller situation I thought was pretty much cut and dried because he was obviously in the doghouse of the coaching staff at the end of last year into the postseason. So I didn't think Colin Miller would be back, but losing Belmar, losing Carpenter's a bummer, obviously. As far as Gusev is concerned, I'm not so concerned about what he's going to cost them, so to speak, on the ice. He's played his whole career in the KHL, and he's been a dynamic offensive player, obviously. Had a great World Championships. Was it last year or the year before when he led everybody in scoring? But the thing for me is about Gusev and his actual playing time on the ice when you take away the people that they had to get rid of. I sit there and I look and I think, would he have even cracked the top 6 on this team? Because you're talking about, you got Max Pacioretty, Stastny, Stone on one line, Marchessault, William Karlsson, Riley Smith on another line. And all the players think of Riley Smith as being the best, most talented player on this team. He kind of shows times where he's reaching that level, and at other times he's not, but he's still got that potential. So I look at those top two lines, that top six, and I'm thinking, does he even make a move into that? And I don't think he would. Obviously, gives him really good depth if he comes in on a third line. But again, I think this is good overall, and I'm talking about, again, on ice, not the transactions the Knights might have made here and there to try to shore up getting Gusev to play for them, but it's great for Jersey, obviously, with PK Subban. Jack Hughes being the number one pick in the draft is probably going to be a star. Great for them. They had an A-plus offseason. Okay for the Golden Knights because I don't think he's going to make a difference one way or the other on the ice because of the six players in the front two lines that I just mentioned. And real good for him also, for Gusev. I think it's a good move for him also.
From an odds standpoint, nothing changing with the Golden Knights that I can see, but it's certainly changing with the Devils. They're now down to, I'm seeing as low as plus 2,800,
wow,
plus 3,000. So this is a team, they were plus 7,500 a while ago. Now, it had already moved down some, but it plummeted even more with the Gusev acquisition. The Devils look like they're going to be at least a playoff team this year.
The only issue I see with them in the offseason that really wasn't addressed, because I guess they're thinking maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe he'll have a bounce-back year, but in between the pipes. They had a problem last year a little bit with Schneider. I think if they can get him to play, like he was a couple years ago.
I think and I'm blanking on his name. I think the rookie who played a lot last year, I think he's probably going to end up as their number one goalie.
Could be, yeah.
So we'll see what happens with the Devils, and hopefully it doesn't impact the Golden Knights too much. A little bit of baseball talk, and we will – well, I guess we could talk about the Stroman deal already. I like this pickup for the Mets because he's under player control through next year. So this was a pickup for next season. It doesn't mean that they're going for it now.
Right.
I think Syndergaard's going to get traded later this week, but I think Stroman's a nice fit for them. He's a good pitcher, great ground ball pitcher. They better play some defense back of him because there's going to be a lot of grounders, and sometimes catching the ball is not a strength for the Mets. But I think they got themselves kind of a bargain here.
Yeah, they're last right now, I think, in Major League Baseball in turning ground balls into outs. But he is the right kind of pitcher that you want to have on your team because they can shore up those problems, as you mentioned, for next season. Syndergaard or Zach Wheeler likely to be dealt. Some baseball experts I hear on the national networks, MLB network, things like that, are saying it's going to be Wheeler that's going to be dealt. Others are saying Syndergaard. I think Syndergaard makes more of a realistic chance to move on from what I'm hearing from a couple of players and reading. But as far as, here's what I like about Stroman going to the Mets. He wants to be there.
Yes.
He absolutely wants to be there. He's a New Yorker. He grew up a Mets fan. And again, for next year, maybe even for this year down the stretch when he starts, and we've talked about this, you and I and other handicappers who make a living off of betting baseball, we all say the same thing. I love getting on a pitcher who comes over to the National League from the American League, at least in his first several starts. And, we might see, he's pitched well enough already, we might see him pitching even better.
Who knows what's going to happen the rest of the week? We've got a couple more days until the trade deadline, which is on Wednesday. I imagine that Thursday, and Jim Feist will be in on Thursday,
nice.
We're going to have a lot to talk about as far as players moving at the deadline. Meanwhile, something that hasn't happened much on the road this year is a star of the night who plays for the Chicago Cubs. But they had one last night as the Cubs beat Milwaukee.
It's the Las Vegas Sports Line's Star of the Night.
Schwarber! Grand slam! 4-0. Wow.
And he wasn't done because Schwarber had another home run with 2 men on later on. Ends up with 7 runs batted in, tying a career high as the Cubs salvage the finale of their series against the Brewers. We'll do more baseball later on when we get to the Monday MJ Christensen 4-4. We're backing that up to the second half of the show, which I didn't tell you, Ari. It's a surprise on my part. That's because everything's just working the way it worked out. We want to leave plenty of time for the Mountain West Conference. So let's get to it as we start to break down these teams. In the Mountain West last year, I think it's fair to say it was somewhat of a disappointment. I think a lot of people thought Boise might be the team that got to play on January 1st. Mm-hmm. Utah State figured to be a good team. They were. San Diego State was probably a bit of a disappointment.
Down the stretch.
Yeah. Their offense just wasn't there, and it wasn't a typical Rocky Long defensive squad. So in many ways, kind of a down year for the Mountain West. I think, even though there may not be a dominant team in the conference this year, I think overall it looks like a better conference than it's been.
I like Boise State again, obviously at the top. Who doesn't, right? And if they can play well and steal a win maybe as a 4-point dog to Florida State to open things up, then all of a sudden they could be in for a huge year. And, of course, they got to replace the quarterback situation. There's no Brett Rippon. There's no Alexander Madison, a running back. They lose their top 2 receivers. But it's kind of like a so what when it comes to how their play is going to be once they get into the Mountain West. And, we saw Chase Cord get hurt last year. He was kind of the heir apparent, I guess you could say, to Brett Rippon. He tore his ACL, and that was mid-season last year, missed some spring practice time this year. And I really thought, looking at what they did in spring practice, Dave, that Jalen Henderson looked best with the starters with that first unit in spring. So we'll see what they decided to do. I think their secondary is great, a little depth shy at defensive end. But if they can steal a win early on, like I said, and play well, then they could be off and running for a potential New Year's Day type bowl bid. And when I look around this league this year, I look at what San Diego State, we mentioned how they struggled down the stretch. If you look at their defensive numbers, first 9 games last year when they were 7-2, they were incredible. They allowed about 20 points per game, 4.5 yards per play. And all of a sudden, in the final 4 games of the year, when everything kind of fell apart for the Aztecs, they all of a sudden went from 4.4 yards allowed per game to like 6.5 yards allowed per game per play. And, of course, as far as the points were concerned, you threw out another touchdown. They gave up about 27 points per contest in those 9 games. When I look at this conference overall, Boise State obviously of the class. Fresno State's got some questions. I know a lot of people are thinking that they come out of their division. Utah State, I look at this team, Dave, and I'm thinking, I had them last year as a surprise team, and they did quite well,
great
obviously. Great quarterback. They've got a situation where they've got a new coach who's an old coach, talking about Gary Anderson. There was a website. I wish I could remember the name of it right now, and I'll text it to you later. You can tell people tomorrow if I remember it. But they had a breakdown of major college programs when a head coach has his second stint at that college, and you drop down in win percentage significantly that second time around. Even Chris Ault, he didn't do badly second time around, but I'm referring to him because obviously everybody knows about the Wolfpack, but Chris Ault dropped off a little bit. Most recently, we saw Bobby Petrino really drop off with his program second time around compared to his first time around.
Although I will say with Petrino, I wonder how much of that had to do with his baggage.
Well, baggage, I wondered if he wanted to be there. Yeah. Listen, I've been married for 100 years, but before that, the second time around with the same girl never quite worked out like it did the first time. There's no excitement, man. It's like stale bread. I don't know how else to put it. And so when I'm looking at this football team, they got the great quarterback, as you mentioned. They do have some areas that they have to make up, including the offensive line when you talk about Utah State. So kind of a quick overview. We can dive into it even more if you like, but I'm looking at those teams and I'm thinking, okay, of all the teams that right now are getting the hype, I think Boise has the best chance to make noise.
I kind of think it's San Diego State. I like them to win the West this year. I don't think Fresno State is going to be quite as good as they were last year. There's no question they're well coached and they've got some talent, but I thought maybe I think they hit their ceiling last year, and there's just some holes on this year's team. And the other 4 teams in the division I don't think can challenge San Diego State. And the Aztecs are going to get better as the season goes along if they stay healthy. Sure. They had a lot of injuries last year. The question is, can Agnew, if he ends up being the quarterback, can he manage the game properly? He's not the type of quarterback that's likely to win a lot of games for you. But that's okay, because Rocky Long's forte is run the football and play defense. And just don't lose the game at the quarterback position. Hopefully, with the experience he's gained, Agnew is going to be a good enough game manager to do that. And if he is, I just don't see the Aztecs having a lot of trouble in the West. I think Boise State could get more of a challenge in the East. And from Air Force, they've got, by Air Force standards, they've got a lot of people back.
I think Air Force and Hawaii are potential sleepers overall in the conference. Yeah. Air Force more than Hawaii. You mentioned San Diego State real quickly. Obviously, they're going to play physical football, going to run right at you. The offense has to stay on top of their game because of what happened last year, and I kind of mentioned it in more detail a little bit ago, but they just got fatigued. That defense got fatigued, and that was it for that squad, and that doesn't normally happen for Rocky Long. You don't usually see his team have that big of a drop-off. Real quick on Fresno State, you mentioned them. There's one rating site that had mentioned that San Diego State is 129th in the country, Fresno State, 129th in the country in returning production. So that kind of falls in line with what you're saying about Fresno maybe being a little bit overvalued, which I happen to think also. You know what team that's going to be fun, I think, to watch, because I think they're going to pound the crap out of the Mountain West, and we'll see how teams do the very next week. Remember it used to be with the Pittsburgh Steelers not all that long ago? You played Pittsburgh the next week, you were battered and bruised.